All right. Hello and welcome in, everybody. Today we have the 28th episode of the Titans of Fantasy Football podcast. As always, I am your host, Gary Daigle. With me, Caleb Armstrong. We got week 9. Cashed it in this week. Kind of a bounce back after last week's monster turnout for, all of fantasy scoring. We had a couple big monster weeks from a handful of players, but in general, we saw some ups and downs. But we're going to kind of run through things again today. We'll hit our key injuries, fantasy breaking news, and rumors going around. We'll talk our studs and duds from week 9. Hit on our buys coming up for next week, some waiver wire ads, guys who you can use to fill in. And we'll also go over our hot or not group. So guys who've been streaking pretty good the last 3 weeks, or they've been cold the last 3 weeks. Caleb, what's your takeaways from week 9 here in the books?
The injuries just seem to be piling on this year. We talked about this last week. This was actually, though, thankfully, one of the better weeks for injuries. There wasn't a whole lot of big, serious ones. We'll kind of go over some here, but it's not the list shorter than it has been, but it's still long, and there's some big names on this list, too. So, I mean, if anything, and I don't want to get too into detail about this stuff, but if anything's proven this year, it's so important to own your handcuffs in running and fantasy football, and it's important to even own like players that are buried in the depth chart on high volume offenses. You've gotten a lot of production from guys who literally were probably not drafted, or you drafted like at the late rounds, hoping they would do something like get better as the year goes on, but they've just had some big guys drop in front of them that they have been putting some solid production in some weeks here. So, Garrett, with that, let's hop in and let's hop into the team that faced the most injuries this week. Happens to be a team that's 3-6, and happens to be our favorite team in the NFL. And they were dropping
our hearts.
I made the joke during this game. I said that they had to stop on the way back and fill up the cart so that they could get it back out on the field, because that's how many times it was going to a locker room. And with that being said, obviously it's Green Bay Packers. 3 guys from the Packers team came out of the game in walking boots. Eric Stokes, he's defense, so it doesn't matter too much for fantasy-wise. But biggest one is Aaron Jones. And when they come out in walking boots, it usually means high ankle sprains of some sort, or ankle sprain of some sort, mid-tier, whatnot. But if it's in a boot, not good. Aaron Jones, so he walked out in a walking boot. You're likely expecting a mid to high grain ankle sprain. We've seen these just be nagging injuries, and 2 to 4 weeks it always seems like to be for an injury report. We haven't heard much on the timeline for him. He said it was a precautionary measurement, but he still never returned to the game after that, so not good if he gets carted off the field first off. And then young guy who showed some promise, probably was started in some rosters due to his matchup this week. Also, Romeo Doubs left with an ankle sprain. He literally couldn't put any weight on it, so this is more than likely a high ankle sprain. And when it's high, you could expect like 3 weeks or more.
Yeah, his was confirmed as a high ankle sprain. They did come out and say 4 to 6 weeks right away for his ETA. And I did just see Aaron Jones. They did have his test come back as negative today. I don't know yet what that means for his timetable to return.
So that was the MRI. So
yeah.
That means it's probably a mid-grade, not high-grade, so he won't need surgery. That's what it's more likely looking at, which we've seen a lot of surgeries, it seems like, on those ankle sprains this year compared to in years past. And then also a scarier one for that team with a depleted wide receiving room as well. Christian Watson gets pulled for a concussion. They said it wasn't a concussion. He passed the test, but he's had, I think, his 3 concussion-like symptoms already this year, Garrett, in the league. And I know he kind of dealt with some injury stuff in the past at North Dakota State University. So if this is a problem going forward, most guys, in dynasty drafts, they probably took Christian Watson first round, early second round. And you're hoping for something. Rodgers needs production, needs some guys. And like I said, with the already depleted wide receiving room, to lose these 2 guys, the top 2 rookie wide receivers on this team, Um, there's going to be some probably other guys trying to step up. We've seen Samori Toure get a little bit of some playing time. So I don't know. This room and this offense is just in shambles. Very biased involved here, but
and
it's pretty easy to see.
This squad was definitely one that you're looking at it, and I mean, we didn't have any obvious players that were jumping off the page. I mean, after Adams departed, obvious holes on that roster was in the wide receiver room. You had these two rookies that you were hoping to step in. Watson just really hasn't been able to stay on the field, and the head injury really, like, if he does have another concussion and it wasn't just a spotter thing, then we could be looking at a longer absence for him as he tries to get right. The Dobbs thing, he definitely has shown his flashes, but for him to go out with a high ankle sprain, it feels like already the writing's on the wall for a lost season for the Packers.
Yeah. But the thing is with Aaron Jones' injury as well, those owners that have had A.J. Dillon on their rosters, now you're going to be really rewarded because we've seen when A.J. Dillon does get that lead role, he is not only just a brute running back, he has pass catching abilities. So we've seen him string some good RB1 weeks when he has been that lead back. And for right now, I think that Kylan Hill just got cleared and is the RB2 probably. Mm-hmm. So more likely you can be starting with confidence finally again, A.J. Dillon in your roster. So.
Yeah, I don't know how much confidence I would have. Just do this.
Just that offense in general.
You can't put points up on the board against the Lions defense.
Yeah,
kind of leaves a gut punch there. But in theory, yes, should be a decent spot. The Evan Ingram news. So this one I did not hear about. Caleb, you want to touch base on him?
Yeah. So he left the game with a back injury. He wasn't doing a whole lot to begin with, actually, for actually a great matchup. Oakland has given up some of the most yards to tight ends this season, and it seemed like he took a shot to the back. We've seen with Evan Ingram, his whole entire years of the Giants, he just could never stay healthy as well. So for him to get with a back injury and leave the game and not return, that is concerning. When you see guys not come out to the field after they take an injury, more than likely you can expect to kind of almost write them off that they're going to be gone the week following. And, you saw a lot more Marvin Jones step up after that. And, Dan Arnold, who we saw actually last year, was fantasy relevant for a while there at that tight end position for the Jaguars. He is still around on that Jacksonville team, so he could get a little more playing time depending on the depth of the leagues if you really are desperate for tight end. But, yeah, Ingram, who has been honestly pretty consistent this year at the tight end. He hasn't been great, like eye-popping off by any means, but he has given you some production out of that position role. And so some guys might be scrambling, might not, depending on if you're relying on him or not. But back injury, no timeline that I've seen so far. So just, I guess, something to look for.
All right. And, with that, we kind of land at our biggest injury news of the day. Sure. Josh Allen. So kind of finished the game. Seemed like everything was all right. Had another stellar fantasy performance. But he's being evaluated for an elbow injury that happened late in the game. And they think it might be part of his UCL in his right elbow. So his throwing arm. And with that, if that does have nerve damage or there's a ligament tear or anything like that, typically this is what you see with baseball players, and it can result in Tommy John surgery, some of the most severe surgeries for pitchers in baseball. Really, they said there's a lot more testing to be done, and there's more information that they need to kind of dig into with his injury to see how severe it is. But you hear UCL and you see that pop up, it gets to be a pretty scary situation. So alarm bells are going off in that situation, but we'll kind of see how that paces out. He right now is by far and away the quarterback number one, and every single week so far this season, he has been a QB1, so in the top 12 scoring for that position.
Yeah.
Tough blow.
I can honestly see the Bills being very cautious here. They're more likely locked into They're one of the top teams in the league. They have a very good winning record right now. I think that they have 2 losses now. I think it is,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not like they don't have they have a viable backup in Case Keenum. We've seen him win some games before in the past, and so if Allen were to miss time, definitely downgrade all the Bills players for the most part for production wise. Diggs might still have, you're more than likely still starting Diggs if you got him. And he still might be okay if Keenum is starting because Case Keenum and Diggs had a great connection when he played for Minnesota. Mm-hmm. So there's probably still that connection there. But, it's funny. Gabe Davis has been so hit or miss this year. And most guys are probably getting sick of that to begin with anyways. But if Allen's out, that offense is going to be a downplay for a big team. So
yeah, and that team obviously has a lot of good talents and toolkits on that offense. So hopefully, Case Keenum can do a good job kind of stepping in as backup, but Josh Allen is the heartbeat of that team, that's for sure.
Yeah, you're not going to replace Josh Allen, so
no.
Yeah. One here, I guess, that I kind of want to cover, and you've been hearing about it all the time, but there has been some little more clarity in it. He's been kind of labeled as the bust of the draft, but it's because of his injury. Keenan Allen, hamstring. Sounds like he kind of re-aggravated it over the bye week, which everybody was hoping that they're like, woohoo, he's got a bye week, he can finally heal. It didn't heal. He didn't play again, and he said he won't play until he feels 100%. So he kind of rushed back week 7, which everybody kind of thought wasn't the smartest move anyways, and he left the game in the first half, and everybody thought, oh, he was just on a limited snap count. No, it might have sounded like he actually hurt it again, and he was, playing it off type deal. But yeah, he will miss some time, and with Mike Williams missing some time, that offense, we kind of talked about Joshua Palmer being a step up, and that's why I mentioned guys who you picked up probably to be, a late guy and has played some significant roles for you. Josh Palmer has, been, I wouldn't say he's been okay for Philly and had a good week this week, but he's been playing a lot more than you probably expected the owners of Joshua Palmer are doing, because Mike Williams missed quite a bit of time and Keenan Allen's missed every game except for the first. So there's one of those guys, again, that are getting some significant playing time and some snaps there that you're probably plugging in your lineup every week.
Yeah. And kind of in the same vein, another guy we haven't seen much of, Michael Thomas. Later last week, all of a sudden, he gets placed on IR due to his foot injury, and now it's coming out that he's likely to miss the rest of the season. So if you've got Chris Olave, you're kind of licking your chops, as he's been playing pretty well, and you're hoping that he can kind of maintain his target volume he's been getting throughout the rest of the season. But Mike Thomas, 3rd year in a row with a lost season.
Yeah, and you used to see it. The guy had first 3 weeks looked good, looked back kind of to himself, and then it sounds like he dislocated his toe almost, and he tried everything to heal it without surgery, and it came to the part where, yeah, he needed surgery on it. It's going to get surgery, and he's going to be more likely off the rest of the season. He is bankrupting the Saints in the past 3 years, getting paid for not really playing. Yeah, crazy. Last one here, kind of a big handcuff. He was a starter, and now he's definitely handcuffed. But Elijah Mitchell returns from IR, and a lot of people dropped him, I would say, when CMC got signed, because Jeff Wilson looking like the starter handcuff. Well, then Wilson, we talked about, gets shipped over to Miami, and Mitchell is in line for that second, that handcuff role. He'll probably get some snaps, I would assume, here and there, just a little change of pace. Not probably fantasy relevant with CMC being in that lineup, but if CMC were to miss time, Mitchell steps into a solid RB2 role again. So he's a good handcuff to look out for here, and if you're holding or already have him, you can expect to put him back in your active lineup if you have that IR slot available.
Yeah. All right, now that we got the bad injury news out of the way, on to some hopeful stuff. Odell Beckham Jr. expected to be cleared for action this week. So what does that mean? That means that he will be medically given the go-ahead and likely will sign with the team following that, which, that's a little bit of, speculation's all over the place, kind of where he might land. But the main step before that is just getting healthy, getting right, getting medically cleared, and then being able to get out on the field.
Yeah, and I feel like his list probably is narrowed down a little bit because, two of the big teams that he talked about going to was LA and the Green Bay Packers. Well, LA is 3-5 right now. The Packers are 3-6. So he wants to go to contender. He wants to sign a multi-year deal. And it seems like right now the front runner, Garrett, from what I keep hearing, is the Cowboys. They got the cap space. They lost Amari Cooper, which might not have been the smartest trade for them because now, ever since they lost Cooper, they have been struggling for that wide receiver 2 role. Gallup really hasn't filled out too well in that role right now, and they want to put somebody with that playmaking capability on the other side of Lamb. And Jerry Jones is all about going after Odell Beckham Jr. It sounds. Another one. Go ahead.
In my mind, I think when you said LA, everybody's talking about the Rams, but for me, if he were to go to the Chargers, I think that would make a ton of sense, especially given their injuries. He goes into a position where he doesn't necessarily have to be the guy. They don't know how much longer Keenan Allen does have in his tank. He's a little bit older as well. I think he would complement that team extremely well.
That's a great, actually. I didn't even think about the Chargers, but yeah, with Allen's injury for a while and Mike Williams might not be returning almost till playoff time, that could be a very, very good landing spot for him, and he would operate as a great wide receiver 2, 3 in that offense, I would think. Possibly even the 1 right away, even. Because right now I think who's their wide receiver 2? I think it was a mix of DeAndre Carter and Michael Bandy this week. So I know the Chargers were kind of, a lot of people in the fan base were kind of mad that they didn't get another wide receiver via trade at the trade deadline, but it is what it is, I guess. One guy who wanted to be traded, and it sounds like he didn't want to be traded at the beginning of the year, but now he wanted to be traded. He goes at the deadline and put to a contender was Brandon Cooks, and we saw it the day before the deadline that he was labeled as not at practice, and all of a sudden he gets not traded. And Garrett and I talked about it, and he kind of makes like a cryptic tweet, kind of. We talked about it last episode, and then he does not play this week on Thursday for personal reasons. And I don't know if something would ever, what's going to happen. A lot of these guys demand it, and then if they don't get traded, they end up asking to be released. Well, if he has to release, the Texans are going to be eating some cap. So it's like, I don't think they will. I don't really know, I guess. If they could maybe come to a conclusion where they can, trunk away some of that contract, maybe there is a world where that happens. But right now, you probably see guys like Cam Akers, where they make up the team and they come back and play. But what Brandon Cooks has been kind of a disappointment this year to begin with, and so you're not getting any production out of him, not even better. So
yeah, it's so strange because it's like going into the year, every year he's got that trade speculation, it seems like. And
this guy's been shipped around.
Going into this season, it was like, okay, are they going to ship him off? Do they want to hold him? And then, because he only had 1 year left on his deal, he goes and signs the extension, and it seemed to put everything to bed. Like, hey, I want to be here, I want to stay. And now for him to get kind of up in arms about not getting moved at the deadline, it just is, it's odd. But, goes out, sits this week, which, he's already been playing like kind of a turd in terms of fantasy production. So you, as a fantasy manager, at least you could put him on your bench knowing that he's not going to burn you.
Yeah. And Garrett, we'll use this leverage to move into our next subject here. And we want to talk about the traded players at the deadline. And some of these guys made a big difference week 1, which is kind of crazy because you learn the new offenses, all that stuff. And the biggest production, I would say, out of anybody this week was T.J. Hawkinson. He got traded, got kind of it was kind of a big deal to get him over in division, which was kind of crazy too. Moves over to Minnesota, has 9 catches on 9 targets for 70 yards in his first game in Minnesota. And that is kind of solid production considering they already have crazy good offensive weapons, I would say, in that offense. So for him to fill in right away and play like 90% of the snaps, that is what you want to see if you're a Hawkinson owner.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's wild to see, I don't know what his snap share was, and that's what I was trying to pull up, but it's wild to see that right off the get-go, he was able to go get 9 grabs on that team. Like, that is supremely, like some pretty great usage for a guy who they just signed.
91 snap percentage. Yep.
Yeah, 91% of snaps. That is nuts for a guy who's only been there a week. Usually, when they're still learning the playbook, that's the kind of thing that, they ease somebody in. But he must just either be really smart or picked it up extremely fast. Wow.
Yeah. And then there's another guy who kind of is the same way, and we mentioned his name already, Jeff Wilson Jr. Lands up in Miami, kind of beats out Raheem Mostert again, which, like, if you're Raheem Mostert having a very kind of like rebound year type deal, and then all of a sudden you see Jeff Wilson come back in your backfield again, you're like, no, let me have it. And Wilson actually outsnaps him. Jeff Wilson Jr. outsnaps him in his first game as a Dolphin. 50% of snap share. Very good on his touches again. He had 9 carries for around 50 yards. And then he also was a bigger back in the receiving game and got a touchdown through the air. So he puts up about 14 points in his first game in Miami in an offense where it was clear from the get-go that Mike McDaniels wanted like a timeshare. And Chase Edmonds obviously proved that he wasn't getting it done. And either was Sony Michel. So Mostert got the bulk of the carries. But when they moved Edmonds in the trade deadline, you knew that they were going to go after somebody else to fill that void. And they got Jeff Wilson Jr., knows the offense with McDaniels, got some comfortability there, and looked good in his first week.
Yeah, this one made so much sense in terms of like a guy who could jump in and ease into the offense in a faster manner. I guess not ease in, he could jump right in.
Yeah.
Just because he's, with Mike McDaniels coming from the 49ers, like there's obvious familiarity there. With how well Mostert's been playing, though, I was shocked to see that they were able to go out and give Jeff Wilson the rock as much as they did. Obviously they saw a lot of success through the air again last week. Just those 2 pillars on the wide receiver, on the outside for the wide receivers there, just getting it done. But yeah, great game for Jeff Wilson Jr. Another guy this week, James Robinson. What was your breakdown of what you thought of James Robinson's first game with the Jets?
A lot more snaps percentage. So him and Michael Carter Michael Carter played well this week as well. So it's not like a rip against Michael Carter. But James Robinson got the goal line work where it matters the most. Just pulling up his stats here. He had 13 carries. So that was a big thing. 48 yards. But then he got, some passing work. He had 2 catches, but he got the touchdown through the air at the goal line. So James Robinson wasn't the most efficient on the ground, but for him to come in, play roughly 50% of the snaps, and get 13 carries, solid considering he was like basically washed out of the offense in Jacksonville. So he's back to fantasy relevant, and the Jets. We have them down here on the list to talk about, too. The Jets, they go out and they beat Buffalo, which was shocking. But the Jets are literally, they're kind of for real. And that defense is really good and really young. And right now, they are living and dying by the ground game. And you think when you lose Breece Hall with how great he has been, your ground game is going to take a hit. Kind of did week 1. But you're playing one of the best rush defenses in the league in Buffalo, and you have Michael Carter and James Robinson combined for about 150 total yards on the ground. That's what you're looking at for. And, Michael Carter, we saw him be that back last year towards the end of the year, but he's always been a smaller back. And now even you got him and Robinson kind of splitting that tango, and they both complement each other pretty dang nice, I would say. Where Zach Wilson didn't do that bad this week. but he hasn't been it, But they said before the game started they're gonna let Zach Wilson sling it when he wants to, but they're gonna rely on basically like they like to see him be aggressive, and what it does is it literally makes the teams because he is not afraid to just huck a bomb. He's kind of like Jameis that way and, and throwing in tight coverage and all that stuff. But yeah, James Robinson making an impact week 2 here for the Jets.
Yeah, good early start for him. Another situation that we've been looking at is Zach Moss at the deadline got traded back to the Colts in an exchange that we saw Nyheim Hines go over to the Bills. Zach Moss, he just never really took off with the Bills. Now he lands in a situation. Deion Jackson had an injury scare this week where he went down, grabbed his knee. He did return to the game, and he looked like he was dinged up a little bit. Obviously, we know that Jonathan Taylor, also very dinged up, has missed 2 games already this year. If we see either of these guys out longer, or both these guys go out, suddenly Zach Moss can be thrust into that starting role for the Colts, which that's another thing we're about to talk about here. This past week, just today, Frank Reich, the coach for the Colts, got fired. Jeff Saturday, the longtime center and Hall of Famer, is now in an interim head coach.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what he does with the quarterback situation. Because Frank Wright said when he was there, we're giving the reins over Sam Ehlinger for the whole rest of the year. Mm-hmm. Sam Ehlinger's had 2 starts. They both have been horrific. Offense is just bad, all around bad. I could honestly see Jeff Saturday putting the ball back in Matt Ryan's hands based off of like the fact that Matt Ryan is going to more likely keep you around in games. Might not be. He hasn't been great this year by any means, but it's Matt Ryan is better than Sam Ehlinger. We've seen enough in the first 2 weeks to make that conclusion. I could say, mm-hmm. And Jeff Saturday is going to want to get some wins underneath his belt. He's going to want to make his team look like something, and so I could see Matt Ryan coming back into that starting role. And if he does, it's an upgrade for those wide receivers because Sam Ehlinger has been just horrible for Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce, Paris Campbell. All those guys were doing some stuff there at the end for Matt Ryan. But with Ehlinger there, I think they've all had like 3-4 catches a game, which...
Yeah, it hasn't been great. I mean, at least with Matt Ryan there, you're getting that steady pass volume. But yeah, just a tough situation to pivot to. But I wonder if this team just kind of at this point embraces the tank and they say, I don't necessarily think that Jeff Saturday wants to lose or anything like that, but they say, okay, let's let Ehlinger ride it out for the rest of the year, and we'll take whatever draft pick we have.
He's going to give us a higher pick. So, yeah, tank for Stroud.
So another thing we talked about briefly, so we touched on James Robinson and his fit with the Jets. How about the Jets? They go out and they beat the rough and tough Bills. Josh Allen, kind of a David and Goliath story where the Jets enter the season, you're really not expecting much. This defense is absolutely colossal. They're really both tough in the run and the pass. They have great corners playing extremely well. Sauce Gardner immediately steps in and has been one of the elite corners in the league right off the get-go.
Yep. I think he's in line right now for Defensive Player of the Year, which we talked about earlier. It was Hall and Sauce, so if they would have got that. So that just proves, they call them the baby Jets. And, they got a lot of, they've been bad for so long that they've gotten a lot of rookie picks. And what they did this year in the draft was kind of crazy. 4 picks in the top 33 picks in total. And we've talked about that last week. They have all kind of shaped out a little bit. Jermaine Johnson finally came back and played this week. But, Sauce Gardner has been, like Garrett said, just unreal. They got Michael Carter, the cornerback, on the other side. He's been solid, too. And, Quinnen Williams, who we talked about, just absolutely monster. So, yeah. But honestly, I wanted to – we didn't add them in the waiver wires. But the Jets' defense is surprisingly available in a lot of leagues. Mm-hmm. And if you're in those leagues where you can start defenses, they've had one game in the past 6 that they've only – or that they've scored less than double-digit points. Everything else has been like 15, which is just for defenses. That's
Very solid.
crazy. They were dropped in so many leagues because they played the Bills this week, and they ended up putting 17 fantasy points for defense against the Buffalo Bills. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's huge, especially against that offense, that's for sure.
Yeah. And then our last bit of news here that we want to cover, and might be futuristic for sure. NFL GMs and owners want to move the trade deadline back to week 10 or possibly even week 12. And I honestly think that makes a huge difference, Gears. I think you would see a lot more trades involved, because then you would see a lot of teams that are having these winner records or are having the loser records who are selling, but these teams who are having the winner records trying to get that pivotal piece, because even since the deadline, we've seen guys who probably would have been shipped based off of this week's performance. Like Brandon Cooks probably would have been gone. We would expect, Packers might have been selling. So, yeah.
In my mind, I think it's a twofold situation. One, you get the teams that kind of have a better idea of where they are in the standings, whether or not they're going to be a bottom-of-the-barrel team, not bottom-of-the-barrel, bottom half of the league team, or they're playoff contenders, where they want to sell some assets and try to actually make a push. So they have a better idea of where they align in their identity in terms of them versus the other teams in the league. And then also, for two, injuries. Every year, injuries are a fact. They're going to happen to every single team no matter what. So if you push that deadline back, then you're kind of, opening up more opportunities for injuries to happen in that time period and teams to be able to fill those holes later on via trade. Or say like, hey, these injuries have derailed us a little bit too far. I mean, we already talked about the Packers, how much the injuries have derailed their offense. That was already not great, but their situation is one where it's like, okay, if you're looking at week 10 or 12 in the year and you are, 3-6 or 4-6, that's not necessarily a playoff contender, and then you're dealing with the injuries. That might be a situation where you look at guys with expiring contracts and you say, hey, we're willing to ship these guys. A little bit more like the rental process that you see in the MLB or the NBA or in the NHL.
Yeah, you definitely, like the MLB is a great one because you see a lot of the rentals, and they do have the deadline a lot later in MLB too, so that makes a difference, I would say. But obviously won't have too much effect on fantasy this year, or not at all, because deadline's already passed, but could down the road. We'll get into our what we do every week, team stud, team dud. This week, last week was just tremendous for fantasy production. This week was still, there was some good players out there this week. There were some guys that put up some big weeks. So team stud, Justin Fields. I mean, his running combo just has finally been unlocked, kind of. And, he had a monster week. Broke the rushing record for a game, Michael Vick's, 176 yards on the ground, 60-yard touchdown run, pretty dang good. Patrick Mahomes, almost 500 passing yards.
Yeah, that I just have to say that touchdown run, as soon as it happened and I saw it on the screen, I'm like, Caleb, you have to go see this. This was an unreal athletic play. I mean, not only was it just one where it's like, okay, that doesn't happen every day. It was a special talent moment where you go, wow, not like maybe him, maybe Lamar, maybe Kyler could have made that run.
Yeah, he got pushed out of the pocket, fakes the throw, and then Lilly puts on the burners and outran some DBs. I think Fields, he ran like a 4.5 or 4.4 40 even. So we knew he had this elite speed, and he'd been. They said we talked about last week. They said they're going to give the guy the hot hand for a running game. So far, the biggest benefactor out of all this has been Justin Fields. He's averaging like 90 yards a game rushing in this past 4 weeks, and that keeps you plenty fantasy relevant in today's game when you can rush for 90 yards and almost a touchdown every week too. Mm-hmm. We talked about Patrick Mahomes, 460 yards through the air, 1 touchdown through the air, 1 touchdown on the ground. He also had 60 rushing yards though too. So he even had a little bit of rushing this week, which is
I think his biggest comical stat of the day is 68 pass attempts.
Yeah. Yeah. a lot. And it was like, it's kind of cool, or I guess you expected Kadarius Toney to be a little bit involved after having a hamstring injury all year and then be healthy and activated week 1 of the Kansas City Chiefs game. Kind of funny. He spread the ball out for the most part, but Kelsey and Juju both ended with 10 receptions. So, like we talked about, Juju is locked into that number 1 role, it seems like, right now in that offense. And Mahomes, when he throws 68 times a game, there's going to be some passes coming his way. So, Tua Tagovailoa, this guy with the Garrett talk, that speeds the speedsters on the outside, Waddle and Hill. I mean, just get those guys those balls, and if you throw the ball to them, they're going to create space, they're going to get yards. It's been just elite level production from both Hill and Waddle with Tua at that quarterback, and you can be confident rolling with Tua at QB1 for a while, I would say here. He's got some good matchups coming up down the road as well. Joe Mixon put it together one of the most elite performances of all time. 5 touchdowns, 4 at half.
I think I heard that it was the 9th highest scoring day for fantasy of all time.
Yeah, yep. I think he ended up with 55 total. The highest all time is 61 or something. Was it Kamara Christmas?
I think it was Jamal Charles on his big day.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so, if you faced Mixon this week, sorry for you.
Are you laughing at me? So I faced Mixon in 4 of my 7 leagues this week. I took that Mixon dagger right to the heart.
Did you win any?
He clobbled all over me.
Did you win any, Garrett?
Not those matchups. not those.
And then some young studs, at the running back position. Ken Walker, Travis Etienne, both bell cow running backs, it seems like, and both are just elite, I would say. They're in that category now. They've put up some crazy fantasy production the past 3 to 4 weeks. Those two have, for sure. I sent Garrett a thing. I actually faced Mixon in a DraftKings matchup this week, and I beat him because I had ETN and Ken Walker as my 2 RVs. So that was I put up 191 points in DraftKings, so I was pretty pumped. But Devontae Adams, huge game, mainly in the first quarter.
Yep.
Did he end up with 11 grabs, I think he had?
I know he had 9 in the first quarter. I don't know what he finished with for the whole day.
Okay. But he had 2 touchdowns on the day, the only wide receiver actually this week to have multiple touchdowns, believe it or not. We've seen a lot of guys have some big high-scoring touchdown games, but he was the only one with multiple TDs this week. He had a really big one, I know that, in the second half, like a 60-yarder.
Yeah, he finished with 10 catches on 17 targets, 146 yards, 2 TDs.
Yep. Okay. 17 targets?
Yep.
Wow. It just feels like within that offense right now, Renfro just went completely, bankrupt type deal where his value is just in the tank. He's nothing. For a guy who put up almost I think he had 1,200 yards last year or something like that, and finished in the top 10 wide receiver rankings at the end of the year, for him to be completely washed out of that offense.
Yeah, I know he was injured early on in the season. I wonder if he's just got something lingering that's really hurting him.
Yeah, I don't know. Or, yeah, you would think with Adams getting all that pressure on him that actually Renfro would open up a little more, but no.
Yeah.
You want to hit the last couple guys here, Garrett?
Sure, yeah. I'll touch these last few. Cooper Kupp, another steady day for him. It's kind of the same thing we just talked about with Adams. The rest of the receivers in that on that team just really haven't been doing a whole lot of anything. And if that offense is doing anything to keep the ball moving, it's through Cooper Kupp. So he ends up with a nice big day again. 8 catches, 127 yards, and a touchdown. Just what we've been seeing out of him. And then Tyreek Hill, another monster day. He's been kind of the big yardage factor for the Miami Dolphins. While Waddle goes and he'll get a touchdown grab and 80 yards, it's those two, all the passes are going to those two
Oh my
It's just
God.
what heavy volume to be like going to these guys again and again. And we talked about Tyreek's his pace that he was on last week, and he follows it up with another 143-yard game. It's just the big boom games that you're getting out of him have just been so big. 190 yards, 160 yards, 177, 188, 143. Just monster big game after big game. Tyreek has been
I want to point out
fantastic.
something. I saw a stat on those two today. Waddle and Hill are averaging right around 3 yards of separation. So it makes it pretty easy for Tua throwing the ball. Waddle honestly should have had about another 70, 80-yard touchdown, but Tua underthrew him. Like he burned this dude wide open on the sideline, and he got underthrown, and it got tipped by the corner. But so,
Yeah.
I mean, these guys are both locked in at wide receiver one type roles right now, as long as Tua keeps slinging it as much as he has. So
Yeah. In the tight end group, we had two guys here. Even though Kelsey had a good game, like Caleb said, another 10 grabs. Dallas Goedert with 8 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. Nice, steady day for him. You love to see him like break into that triple digits for receiving yards. That's his first 100-yard game of the season. Nice, solid game from him. And then Cole Kmet, out of nowhere, after his slow start to the season, a couple of goose eggs, he gets 5 catches, 41 yards, 2 touchdowns. Gotta love it, baby! Finally getting involved.
after being a dud for how long in the beginning of the year?
Oh gosh, he was certainly dropped.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody would hold on to him after he had, of his first 7 games. I think he had 2 that were 4 points, and then the rest were 1 or less.
Yeah.
That certainly makes it difficult to hang on to.
Our duds for the week. A lot of these guys that we're going to be naming here have actually been solid fantasy production the past couple weeks. So for them to just like have some solid weeks and then just one of these ones, it's what hurts you in the scoring department for fantasy. Marcus Mariota, hasn't been a great quarterback, honestly, but he's kept fantasy relevant with his legs so far this year. But just got kind of shut down this week. Antonio Gibson, you expected him to have a lot larger role with J.D. McKissick being out with a neck injury. He's been getting a lot of receiving yards to begin with before that, and I don't know if the Vikings defense was just that elite this week or what, but he didn't have a good week at all. Swift, to see him have another slow performance or weaker performance is scary because he had that shoulder injury, and you saw Jamal Williams get all the goal line work again and more touches in the ground game. So, I think he had 10 total touches a week before, or 8 or something like that. And Dan Campbell goes, yeah, that was 1 too many. And so that's just a big red flag right there.
They keep saying more and more that he's a lot more injured than we actually know. So that shoulder must just be messed up for him.
Yeah. Aaron Jones and Deonta Foreman. Jones talked about the ankle injury, had a juicy matchup against the Lions. Foreman, Chuba Hubbard was out again, so you expected him to have a big day. But when you're down 45-0 at half, you can't expect a whole lot of carries coming your way in the second half. And he was out snap, or he had the most snaps. He only had 46%. But you saw Blackshear get a lot of snaps, and then Brown get a lot of snaps. It's because Foreman's not much of a passing game guy, and they didn't run the ball at all in the second half. I think I wouldn't be too worried, honestly, about Foreman. And I'm not saying this because Garrett's probably laughing because I got him in a couple leagues. But I think that you're probably going to be okay, all depending on game script. Panthers looked really, really bad this week compared to the last 2 weeks they haven't. So I think it was more game script there. But surprising one, too, another guy who faced an injury 3 weeks ago who hasn't been the same since he came back is Amon-Ra. Lions, he had that injury, was a head injury, right? Or I can't remember what it was. He had something and then he actually came back and had a head injury. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Was it an ankle or something like that?
I think so.
He has put kind of 2 stinker weeks back to back. So it's like, is he not that healthy as we expect too? So, or it's just the Lions' offense not really clicking as well.
Yeah, so I remember it now. Amon-Ra had that concussion spotter pull him out of the game. So, and they did clear him from concussion protocol. But yeah, he was a surprise. I thought he would have been more involved with that offense, even though he had a tough matchup against Jair Alexander this week. A couple other big names: Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. In a game where Tom Brady throughout the whole season, it seems like he's had these high volume games, and these guys are getting good target volumes again this week. 58 pass attempts, but only 280 yards. So Chris Godwin and Mike Evans keep getting a fair amount of catches, but their yards per catch are very, very low. So they're just not doing a whole lot with it. Gabe Davis has a quiet day. He's always been hit or miss, but a little bit colder as of late. Michael Pittman with a cold day. Kind of the same thing we talked about earlier. That Colts offense just hasn't been passing the ball efficiently at all. So Pittman has been ice cold lately. A guy who hasn't been, DJ Moore, coming off of 2 consecutive pretty decent games with PJ Walker, has a rough go at it here in a matchup where you kind of expected him to come out and do all right with. But not a great outing for DJ Moore. Ends up with 2 catches for 24 yards, after back-to-back games with over 10 catches, or 10 targets and a touchdown. The Cincinnati game, too, they were getting blown out. You would have thought that they would have been chucking it, and he would have gotten a boatload of garbage time because they were down early. Somehow that wasn't the case.
Yeah, we'll talk about the guy who's been the biggest benefactor of that, actually.
Yeah. Our last 2 duds for this week, Gerald Everett, who I thought would have had a great matchup this week against the Falcons. A couple bad drops, not a great outing for him. And then Hayden Hurst for the Bengals. Quiet day for him as well. We talked about Joe Mixon's big day.
Tough to have a good day when that happens.
Yeah, just kind of things went a different direction for them.
Yeah. So our team's on bye this week. You got the Ravens, Bengals, and Jets. Ravens and Bengals definitely have a lot more fantasy relevant players that will be out. So, you got Lamar, Mark Andrews, Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. Those are all guys who've been pretty much locked in at the starting spots that are out. But then you got the Jets, and you might have the fill-in flex guys. Jets haven't been crazy relevant since Breece Hall got injured, but Michael Carter, Garrett Wilson, James Robinson. Those are all guys you might have rotated at the RB2 flex spot, but they will all be out on bye this week.
Yeah, and I think we actually have some pretty good options because you're gonna be trying to fill in for both your quarterback and a couple of running back positions here that are important. Wide receivers, it seems like everybody's going to have some, but let's kind of segue into waiver wire ads here. I'll open with a quarterback option with a good upcoming schedule. Daniel Jones. In most leagues, you're probably looking at him as a guy who was dropped during his bye week, and he has a good upcoming schedule coming up. So he plays Houston and Detroit the next 2 weeks. Daniel Jones has been a pretty good streamer for the most part. Kind of had some ups and downs. Obviously not the sexiest pick, but had pretty good rushing numbers going into the last few weeks. Where, as a streamer, with these 2 teams coming up for the matchups, pretty good options. And kind of to pair him, you could also look and see if anybody dropped Wan'Dale Robinson in your league. Because going into that bye week, he was looking like the number 1 for the Giants and actually getting pretty decent target numbers and kind of starting to step up as a rookie.
And now with Kadarius Toney out, he is literally locked in at that wide receiver 1 role, probably for the rest of the season. So that is a good waiver wire guy to look at, like you said, for getting dropped. A guy whose name we have mentioned already in this one and should be on the waiver wire ads because he was dropped heavily because of Christian McCaffrey, Jeff Wilson Jr. He could roll right back into that RB2 role for you, which is solid. If you held on to him, good for you. For those that, leagues where he was dropped and probably 12-man teams or less, he is worth a pickup again. So.
Yeah, and they have another good matchup this week going up against Cleveland, who has not been the best against the run.
No.
Another guy who's on a team where he could be dropped. So, Gus Edwards. Right now, he's playing Monday Night Football he was held out of Monday Night Football. They said they wanted to give him a little bit more time with his injury. Right now, next week they have a bye for the Ravens. If somebody in your league drops him this week as he goes onto that bye, he should look to be the starter going into week 11, and also could be a good flex option for you for that team, especially, and how well they run the ball. Definitely a guy you want to keep an eye out for, and if you have a bench spot, good stash for the week.
Yep. A guy who I like of late and has showed some promise for his draft capital, Terrence Marshall Jr. Garrett talked about like DJ Moore not coming out. He had another strong showing for targets again this week and turned him into more yards and a touchdown, actually. I think he ended up with like 4 grabs, and he had 15 targets over the last 2 games. So that is big. When you see a guy step in that RB, or wide receiver 2 role, we talked about Robbie Anderson getting out and getting traded. He's filled in, getting targets, but he has Atlanta and Baltimore in his next 2 weeks. And both of those are juicy matchups this year for wide receivers. So if Carolina, and they did already declare P.J. Walker as their starter going into Thursday, which P.J. Walker really, really struggled in this game. But it's proven that the past, when P.J. Walker is under center, they're actually a more effective team passing the ball this year. So when he's under center, it's probably a better increase for Moore and Marshall.
Another guy we have here, Chase Edmonds. For those who don't know, he was traded to Denver in a move when Bradley Chubb got moved over to Miami, kind of as a throw-in. Denver, the last few weeks, they added Latavius Murray off the street, was not on the team, is pretty long in the tooth, and he's actually been pretty decent since he came over and has been playing for Denver. Chase Edmonds gets to kind of get a restart here in this situation and does kind of pretty good in both the receiving game and the rushing game. He has an opportunity to potentially step in, usurp Latavius Murray as the RB1 in this offense. We don't really know the Melvin Gordon situation. Things seem fishy there, but he's got an opportunity to become a starter again, and he's worth a flyer just to see kind of what happens.
Yeah, and with Edmonds, probably was a good landing spot, I would say, for him, because Murray's 32 or 33, and Melvin Gordon, I think he's 30. So Edmonds comes in at age 25, youngest running back there as of right now. So if Denver decides to, if they win some games and then get back into playoff contention, Edmonds could get a bulk of the carries, considering those guys' probably legs aren't as fresh as he has been. And he's been such limited snap role for Miami where he hasn't been used much this year. So he could be, a potential guy who, like Garrett says, could get a starter worthy again. Odell, we talked about him already in the podcast. Not going to go too much in there. But like we talked about, could expected to be cleared this week. Probably going to sign this week too, I would say. And more than likely, he's going to end up as a top contender, and he wants a multi-year deal, it sounds like. We'll see if that may happen because he's 30 off 2 torn ACLs, but you never know. Last guy that we want to talk about here, Garrett talked about some QB options. This guy's crazy how much available he is in redrafts right now, and that is Deshaun Watson. He's expected back week 13 after the Browns bye. Again, and his first matchup is Houston. So, juicy matchup right away. Mm-hmm. Deshaun hadn't played in almost 2 years, but it's Deshaun Watson. He was a top 5 quarterback in the league before he had the suspension, or I guess not suspension, but just held out of football and the suspension. So, maybe you have to shake the rust off, but he is a guy you could be going into the playoffs with a very reliable quarterback if he returns to form that we saw in Houston.
Yeah, and also, that offense so far has looked pretty. Not only do they keep the ball rolling, fantastic rushing offense. They have good receiving options. Mari Cooper's reliable out there. He's stepping into a good situation, good offensive line. And yes, he probably is going to have to shake the rust off, but he gets a revenge game against his old team right away. So kind of a good situation there, and they're not a great defense.
Yeah, and a good thing for him too is Njoku probably should be back that week too. So that's probably he's been their probably number 2 option all year, and with him coming back, that'll be a good thing for Watson.
Yeah.
But
all right, the last section we got here is our hot or not. We're not going to jump too far into this because we've talked about these guys quite a bit, but we just kind of wanted to acknowledge guys who've win on a 3-week streak and they've either been hot or they've been cold. So we're going to use the same criteria as we hit on in week 3, I think, when we did this first. Yep. So a quarterback who's scoring 20 points or more, a running back and wide receiver who scored 15 points or more, and a tight end who scores 10 points or more in 3 consecutive weeks. So at quarterback, we have 3 guys who've done it the last 3 weeks. That's Justin Fields, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen. So, 2 guys who've been there, Mahomes and Allen, and Fields, who's been putting it together lately, and it's been pretty great.
Yeah. Running backs, some old guys, and then some guys who've been really balling out this year. Travis Etienne, Derrick Henry, who's back, Austin Eckler, touchdown monster, Ramondre Stevenson. I think you said, Garrett, before the game this week, he's had 5 or 6 games in a row with over 20 points, fantasy. He has been a very, very solid running back. Yeah. And then Saquon Barkley, who, we talked about back in full form, basically.
Yeah, and one guy, Ken Walker, barely missed that list.
Yeah. I think he had this is half PPR rankings, guys, so they might be a little different on your stuff, but what do you have, like 14 something?
Yeah, it was like 14.6 or 7, something like that. For our wide receivers, we actually had none that had 15 or more the last 3 weeks, but we had several that were close. We'll just name them: Justin Jefferson, DeAndre Hopkins, Juju Smith-Schuster, Stephon Diggs, and Tyreek Hill. All were close, but not quite there for all 3. Most likely they had 2 very good weeks and one that was, low teens.
Yeah, and I told Garrett, I said, all makes sense except for Juju. Like, the fact that Juju has kind of locked himself in that wide receiver 1 is kind of shocking to see his production. It's been consistent of late, too. Tight ends, 2 of them. 2 guys that are very well known in the tight end world. Not much shocking surprises, I would say. Travis Kelce and George Kittle. The one thing I do want to mention here without going too much into it, George Kittle has had 2 very solid weeks since Christian McCaffrey has been in that offense. And I think that is a big benefactor due to the fact that teams have to really, really rely in their game strategy around McCaffrey, and where Kittle doesn't stay in and be a left tackle. He can actually go up for passes.
Kind of in the same scheme, we use the same exact criteria for our not section, which is, quarterbacks under 20 for 3 consecutive weeks, running backs and wide receiver under 15 for 3 consecutive weeks, and tight ends under 10 for 3 consecutive weeks. So quarterbacks, we have 3. They're veterans, and they're guys who have been good for fantasy in years past, but they are not guys who you start anymore. Aaron Rodgers, Matt Stafford, Russell Wilson. 3 guys who've been cold all year, and they've been cold the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, running backs. James Robinson, he had a couple of good, bad weeks there at the end. James Conner, he's had 0 over 15 this year. He's 0.
That was a shocker for me.
Yeah, and he was flirting at that round 1, mid-round 2 level pick. Mm-hmm. Same guy who's been in the kind of same boat as of late, Leonard Fournette. Worst rushing yards per carry in the league, and that offense is just horrible running the ball this year, it seems like. He has been somewhat relevant because of his passing work, thankfully. Devin Singletary, Darrell Henderson, David Montgomery, A.J. Dillon, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Any big names that stick out there at the end?
Honestly, most of those guys' names stick out because they were doing okay at the start of the year. A.J. Dillon, he's been cold for a bit. David Montgomery had a couple good games. Week 3 to 5 was doing okay. Devin Singletary, when he opened the season, looked like he was going to be putting it together and become like an every week fantasy guy. Yep. He actually looked like eyeball test good. Clyde Edwards-Helaire opened the season looking good, and then everybody kind of knew his usage numbers weren't great and he was going to cool off. Well, he has gone ice cold. That rushing offense is absolutely terrible right now. Receivers out there. So this one is a bit shocking because we have some bigger names. DK Metcalf. Cold. Tyler Lockett's been doing all right, but DK dealing with some injuries. T. Higgins.
2 weeks without Chase, and he hasn't got one. That's crazy.
That's crazy. Amon-Ra St. Brown. We talked about his injuries. Chris Godwin. That one has been shocking because he's getting the targets. Gabe Davis, hot or cold guy. Cold as of late. Michael Pittman, ever since the quarterback change. Cold. Devonta Smith. That offense is clicking. They're doing well, and he hasn't been a big part of it.
Lately, yeah. He started off the year pretty dang good, and like you said, just as of late has been a less role, I would say.
Yeah. And then the last guy on our list who is, pretty much droppable at this point, Drake London. Through the first 3 weeks of the season, I think it was, he looked pretty good, had good usage numbers. The last 6 weeks, he's been a complete ghost on the field. They just haven't been passing it, and he's a guy who you should just not have on your roster at this point.
Yeah. Obviously, don't drop him in Dynasty. That's what we're not saying.
Yeah.
That. Strictly redraft purposes.
Do not drop him in Dynasty.
No, it's all related to quarterback play right now. I think he's averaging 8.9 points a game, which isn't that good. But also, I just saw a thing. A.J. Brown averaged 8.9 points a game with Marcus Mariota at quarterback. So look how it turned out for him. Tight ends, one name really sticks out, or two names I should say really stick out here. But Gerald Everett, Hayden Hurst, Robert Tonyan, Mark Andrews, and Tyler Higbee. Andrews, we can relate to his injuries. He's been kind of, supplemented by that. We saw him have some huge weeks earlier in the year, but he did have 2 dud weeks earlier in the year too. But for the most part, you're not going to not start Mark Andrews. But Gerald Everett, Garrett and I talked, he was very, very solid at the start of the year. And with all these injuries, you expect him to be better. And it just seems like he's got the case of the dropsies right now.
Yep.
Everybody's ripping on Herbert. Like they're saying he's not doing that good this year, all this stuff. Yes, he had that super bad injury to his ribs. But if you watch this past week, there's so many drops. And then I think he had 2 of them that were boink right off the hand for picks. And it's like, you can't blame that on that guy. He's putting the ball where it needs to be. They're just not making the plays for him.
Yeah, I thought for sure when Mike Williams went down, Everett would actually be the one who would step up, just because they were utilizing him so much early on in the year, and he looked good. But man, not quite a reality of what's happening there.
No, definitely not. And with that, guys, that wraps up our summary for the week. Week 9 in the books, on the double digits of the weeks. Crazy how fast the year goes every year, or football and stuff. But now we're going to start seeing, these playoff teams really start making the push. And for your playoff schedules, definitely look at what you need. If you're a team that's mediocre, see what you need to get, see what you need to possibly make a trade for. Get that in your lineups, or maybe hit some of these waiver wires, and they might help you later on in the year.